Hello, everyone. I am Shivani Mehta, your host, and you have tuned into the Project IMG podcast. Today, I have a guest who is an international medical graduate from the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland who matched into pediatrics in the United States. So, from Ireland to working as an upcoming resident in the Boston Combined Residency Program, I present to you Dr. Tara Jamieson. Hi, Dr. Jamieson. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm not quite Dr. Jamieson yet. Still have to wait another 19 days before I can get that title. But I'm doing very well today. How are you?
I'm very good. And we are excited to have you on our podcast today. So thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, no problem. It's my pleasure. Happy to share my experience.
Thank you so much. So I think the best way to start this interview is for you to introduce yourself and tell us more about yourself.
Yeah, so my name is Tara Jamieson. I'm a final year medical student at the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland. I've recently matched, thankfully, to my top choice program, the Boston Combined Residency Program in Boston, Massachusetts, in pediatrics. And I am extremely excited to get started. In my spare time, I also play a lot of music. So I am a musician prior to being a medical student. And you may have also seen me on the second season of Ireland's Got Talent.
That is amazing. Like just hearing you list out everything, I'm just like, you're such a diverse person. And it's amazing to see you juggle everything that you have on your plate and do so well. So that is truly inspirational. And we are really, really happy to have you on our podcast. So once again, thank you so much for being here. I would like to ask you that you said that you have an interest in music. So what sparked your interest in medicine?
Yeah, so I think I need to kind of go back, way back. When I was in high school, I was really interested in science and academia. And at that time, my goal was to kind of do the whole traditional, you do a 4-year undergrad in biology, and then you go on to medical school. However, I also had this kind of secondary interest that had stemmed from my childhood of music. I've been singing for as long as I can remember. I play multiple instruments. And it's something that I couldn't really live without. And when I was graduating from high school, I had this amazing opportunity to go to Berklee College of Music that also happens to be in Boston. And while I was there, I discovered music therapy. And music therapy is an allied health profession, which tries to assist people with music. So it's basically a therapeutic modality that uses music as a tool for therapeutic intervention for non-music related goals. So for me, it kind of felt like the best of both worlds. I got to mix my love of music with my love of helping other people and being involved in healthcare. And so I completed my degree at Berklee and I started working in the profession, and I worked through my music therapy internship and then finally as a board certified music therapist. And during my work, I kept getting more and more interested in what brought people to music therapy. And then that involved me doing a lot of research into the pathophysiology of their diseases or their conditions or their genetic syndromes. And that then kind of re-sparked that scientific interest. And I knew I couldn't be truly happy unless I had a little bit more of that in my life. And I wanted to do more for my patients. So medicine kind of seemed like the right next step to take.
That's amazing because music and medicine are two diverse fields per se. So to see you kind of merging them together and always having an interest in both somewhat, right? Because even when you were doing music, you ended up finding your way to music therapy, which is also a very nice combination of medicine and music. So it's very interesting to see sometimes that why people go into certain fields of medicine and what sparks that initial interest. Since you started talking about your interest in music, I would like to take that a step further and ask you that what other hobbies or what other interests did you have that you think might have contributed also to your application for residency?
Oh, so, I included a wide variety of my hobbies and interests. In kind of my application to residency, I've got kind of a few different things that I enjoy doing that kind of keep me sane as a person. The main thing for me is music. The second thing for me is that I enjoy helping other people and I enjoy an aspect of education. So for me, that kind of conspired to create my YouTube channel where I post videos weekly of me singing and performing music for my audience every week. But then also I get to share kind of parts of my life. I do kind of day in the life type vlogs, but then I also get to share kind of the ins and outs of what my medical experience has been like. Because when I was going through it, I didn't really have a reference point for what being an IMG was going to be like, or what things were going to be like as an IMG from Canada going to Ireland, hoping to match the United States. I had no idea where to start. And I had to do a lot of figuring it out on my own or with my friends. And I thought it really shouldn't be this hard. Let me see what I can do to share what I've learned with other people. I also enjoy running. I knit in the evenings. I enjoy reading. And these are all things that you put onto your application that can contribute to who you are as a person. I think part of what helps applications is when the program director can look at your application and see, wow, this person is a person. They're a whole person outside of all of the achievements on their application. They have a dog. They like to go walking on the beach. They have a zodiac sign that they put in their dating profile. These are all things that contribute to, wow, this is an actual person sitting in front of me. And I think that's especially important in the era of virtual interviews where you can't actually go in and shake someone's hand. You really have to demonstrate this is who I am as a well-rounded individual.
No, I feel like being sometimes, as medical students or international medical graduates, trying to apply for residency, we tend to be almost so like laser focused on trying to get into that residency. So we're focused on doing everything medicine related. And sometimes we need to like take a step back and realize that program directors, of course, they want a student that is dedicated to the field of medicine. But at the same time, they are looking for an applicant that is well-rounded and is also a person outside of medicine. However ironic that sounds, but it is true because like you also need to be a person outside of medicine. Medicine is a career for you, but they want to see that well-roundedness. So I think we found the perfect person to demonstrate that because you are absolutely well-rounded and it's amazing to see you juggle all of this. So I think from here, I think the next question that I have for you is that how did you plan your journey? Like, how did you decide that, okay, I want to do my residency in the United States? Because you said yourself, you went from Canada to Ireland, and now you're planning a residency in the United States. So how did you go about that?
So I guess there's that kind of little soundbite on TikTok, like make the plan, work the plan, watch the plan go off the rails, make a new plan. And that's kind of how medical school has been for me, because you make a plan, you try to work that plan as much as possible, and then life happens. So for me, when I applied to medical school, I was looking for places that would help get me back to Canada, which is how I ended up in Ireland. There's really good relationships between Irish medical schools and Canadian residency programs. But then I came to Ireland, I was in my first year, and then my personal circumstances changed to the point where now it makes more sense for me to go to the US. And so that plan completely changed. And my focus had to change along with it. Then, kind of 2/3 of the way through my second year, COVID happened. And then that made kind of the rest of the plan look different. So along the way, there's been a plan for what should happen, but that plan is constantly needed to change. And to the point where planning is important, but I think what's even more important than having a plan and working through it is how you adapt and how you are flexible in the face of change, which I think has been kind of this major focus this application season, is how adaptable you are and how you respond to these quick changes that happen, because in healthcare, things are changing so quickly.
I think that's very important. Like I'm actually very happy you brought this up because people tend to, they like to plan things out, right? We're kind of OCD in that because we need to have everything set in place. And we're like, okay, 5 years down the line, this is where I should be. This is what I should be doing. But at the same time, it's very important to recognize that life comes into play. And things don't always work out the way you want them to. So to be able to adapt to that and to be flexible enough to figure out a new plan or a plan B is very, very important. And I feel like that is actually an important skill to have as a medical professional. Because as you said yourself, like the medical field is constantly changing. If you don't adapt to it, then you're going to get left behind in a way, right? Like,
yeah, exactly.
No, go for it.
And I mean, this isn't to say I love routine. I try to get up at the same time every day. I have a morning routine. I have a night routine. I like having things that are the same. But if it wasn't for being open to different opportunities and being open to changing my plan, certain things in my journey wouldn't have happened. I didn't plan to somehow end up on an Irish TV show in my first year of medical school. Not part of my plan, but it happened and I adapted and I worked through it. And that's brought me so many more opportunities because of that. Then I didn't plan for the pandemic to happen, but you work through it. You kind of change what your goals and expectations are, and then you keep moving forward. Without COVID, I probably would have gone for a more traditional elective at an academic institution, whereas I was able to find an elective through some personal connections at a private practice. And I learned so much. So it's about being open to the opportunities that come your way and not being too rigid in, well, this wasn't how my plan was supposed to go. I can't do this. This isn't part of my plan. Being open to the opportunities as they arise is really important. And that then goes into clinical practice as well.
No, I completely agree with you. And I think I want to reach out to our listeners and say that, you might be also facing some hurdle along the way. The entire journey to get a residency in the United States, it's a marathon, You cannot expect that there's not going to be any hurdles along the way. So if you do hit those hurdles, just, stand back up, find another way and move forward, right? Sometimes that's all you need to do, and just be open to the other opportunities that come knocking at your door. You never know where that might lead you, right? So I'm actually very happy you brought this up because it's actually an important life lesson for all of us to have. So I know you said that what you had planned was not initially your original plan, but once you started getting on this path of going to medical school, deciding that you wanted to do residency, how did you start planning out taking the step exams, applying for the match, and then eventually matching in? So how did you plan all of that out?
Yeah, so I would say that in that sense, I'm exceptionally lucky. My medical school is really experienced with having students matched to the US and Canada. So we have a lot of resources in place to help us kind of guide that whole process. Now, what I will say about RCSI is that it's kind of like Hogwarts in the sense that help will always be given at Hogwarts for those who ask for it. So you have to ask about things like this. It's not necessarily in your face. And then you have to then make use of it once you ask for it. So things like getting involved with career counseling at your school and saying, okay, what resources do you have? What experience do you have? And then how can I use that experience to my advantage? The next thing that came into play was that because there are so many IMGs at my medical school, there are a lot of people going through the process, including students a year or two ahead, which means that if you make a friend that's a year ahead of you, then they can say, well, this is what worked for me. This is what didn't. And they're going through the process just a little bit ahead of where you are, which means that they are right there in proximity with what study resources are best to use for whatever USMLE exam, how to time your USMLE exams in accordance with your school curriculum, because every school is going to be different. Every program is going to be different with when you think you should take them. So at my school, I took USMLE step 1 in the summer between year 2 and year 3, because I'm in a 4-year program. And then I took step 2 in the beginning of the summer between year 3 and year 4. And I did my electives after I did step 2. And then I'm planning to sit step 3 in June, right before I start residency.
Okay. First of all, best of luck for your step 3.
Thank you.
The second thing is, I liked what you said. You quoted Harry Potter, and I feel like that's very relatable because, you need to be proactive and no matter what you do, right? Like you're bound to face difficulties. You're bound to hit some part where you don't know exactly what you're doing. And I feel like what you brought up is actually very important. You need to be proactive and you need to network. And both are important skills, not just in like trying to get through this journey. I think those are important life skills. And I think like the theme of this interview seems to be like you're teaching us life skills in a way, which is very interesting. And I really appreciate it because, medicine is one thing, right? We started in the beginning, we mentioned this, that like medicine is one thing, it's a career. But at the same time, this career also teaches you a lot of life skills along the way. So I'm really happy that you're bringing those up and explaining those to us, because there are a lot of people that are either starting on the journey or are in the middle of it, and they might be facing some of these things or will face some of these things. So I hope our listeners are listening, and I hope that they take your word of advice seriously. So now I want to ask you that I know you said that things kind of worked out for you from your school's end, but when it came to actually writing out your application and presenting yourself, because you applied during the COVID era. So a lot of the things were different from the typical, you send in your application, you get an interview invite, you go for the interview invite in person. So how did you go about doing that? And how did you manage your schedule around that?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that, again, I'm really thankful for is that I have kind of formed this network of my fellow med school friends who are all going through the application season together. In particular, I have a friend of mine who is also applying in pediatrics. So we were able to help each other edit our personal statements, edit our ERAS applications, take a look at kind of what's important to include, what's not so important to include. And then finally, because we were both going into pediatric interviews, we could then help each other practice interviews. And we would do it on Zoom or on FaceTime and practice them virtually. So you can say, oh, hey, girl, the way your camera is right now, it's cutting off half of your head, or that light is way too bright for you. Because in the age of virtual interviewing, part of your presentation is kind of how you look. So for me, I did all of my interviews here at my desk. And for those who haven't been to my YouTube channel before, this is my YouTube background. So for me, it's like it made sense for me to do my interviews here, because if they looked at my YouTube channel prior to my application, they're now in a familiar space. So they kind of get a sense of who I am. Now, I did blur the background because it's my bedroom, but it kind of gave them another sense of who I am. So you can use virtual interviewing to your advantage. Now, when it came to planning out how to structure the application, I got my ERAS my ERAS token in June, which is usually when they come out. And according to this year's application schedule, I believe it's the same. And I immediately got on ERAS and started just going through the different sections, because it's something you've never really seen before. And I think it's important just in those first couple of days after you get your token and after you get access to the portal, just to go through and say, okay, this is all the stuff I need to track down. This is all the stuff I need to include. This is how I access the portal. This is how I make sure my USMLE transcript transfers. So I think those are all really important things. Then just start writing and write and write and write and write and write and keep writing and keep editing. I had one of the attendings at my elective review my application right before I submitted it, and she gave me a lot of great feedback. So it's also important to include people who know you really well, who might not know you as well. She gave me a lot of pointers that were like, hey, I didn't know all these personal things about you. You might need to fill in some gaps for people who don't know you personally. Okay, which is great. So it's kind of about starting early, editing, and kind of trusting your gut at some point. There's a point that you reach where you're like, this is it. I can't touch it anymore. It's kind of like there's this Eliza Schlesinger comedy sketch, like comedy, what's it called? She does a stand-up comedy special. And she talks about like this peak window where if as soon as you start like messing with your makeup too much, it just starts going downhill. So there's a point that you hit with your ARIS application where you kind of feel that you've hit the sweet spot. Once you feel that you've hit that sweet spot, stop.
Okay, so thank you so much for sharing that. My next question to you is there something that you suggest students should not do in their applications, like from your experience or anything that you've heard? Is there anything that you caution students to be careful about or simply not do in their applications?
So I guess I would caution people, or maybe not caution, but more advise to recognize that you can use your ERAS application and your personal statement in different ways. So your ERAS application is kind of like a reiteration of your CV with some like additional points that you get to elaborate on more in the bubbles. I wouldn't just reiterate your CV or ERAS kind of application into your personal statement. They already have that. So I would use your personal statement to try and elaborate and provide more new information for your reader, something that they can't get from your experiences alone, your thoughts, your feelings. I think a personal statement should really help people describe who you are. Your ERAS application, your CV, that describes what you've done, but what you've done isn't who you are. So I think it's really important to really utilize your personal statement effectively to say, this is who I am, and this is why I've become who I am.
Okay, thank you so much. So since we're talking about the application process and the application itself, my question to you is, do you think that having research on your application is important? And if so, how do you suggest students find these opportunities that are out there?
Yeah, so this is something I get asked a lot. And something that I would kind of like to flip is that your application is all about balance. So having research is important, but you have to make sure that it's in balance with everything else you've done. So if you have a ton of research but no clinical experience, you might want to try and work to bring those two things a little bit more into balance by increasing your clinical experience. That the same goes for research. If you don't have a ton of research and a lot of clinical experience, you'd have to work to try and bring those into balance as well. It's not going to make or break your application if you don't have a ton of research. I only have one research experience on my application, 3 posters, no publications. So for me, it's all about trying to use that research experience to bring into balance the amazing clinical experiences that I have. And I think that sometimes as medical students, and especially as IMGs, we try to focus on, well, what can make me stand out? I don't have enough research. And you get focused on that one thing. Oh, I need to get more clinical experience. Oh, I don't have enough US clinical experience. And I think it's really important to try and think about your application as pieces of a puzzle. Each individual piece doesn't make sense on its own. It only makes sense in the overall picture. So I wouldn't do research for I wouldn't do research for research's sake. I would do research to have it fit into the overall picture of your application.
Okay, fair enough. So what do you suggest for students that may have red flags in their application? How do you suggest they address them?
So I think that the personal statement, again, is a really great place for students to address things. So because you can tell a story, you can say, well, I took a year off because I wanted to do these things. And this is how I grew during that year. And these are the things that I learned. And you can elaborate and you can expand on your thoughts and feelings and how you grew if you took a year off, for example. or if you have a USMLE failure, addressing that in a personal statement and saying, this is what happened. This is how I grew from it. This is what I did to make myself better. And now I've made myself better on a subsequent USMLE exam. It's about showing growth and about showing this is how I've learned from these things that have happened, because I think that any red flag can be used as a learning opportunity, and then demonstrating what you've done to learn from that and how you've grown from that. Kind of this whole theme that we've been talking about of being adaptable and open to opportunity. It's about kind of seeing, how can I use this to my advantage? How can I take this lump of clay and mold it into a beautiful vase?
Okay, fair enough. So do you have any advice for people that are planning on applying this upcoming math cycle?
Yeah. So I would say have a good support system. Find one or two people who you are close with, who you can call when things get tough or when things are great. I have my two closest friends, and if I got a really tough rejection or if I was having a really bad night, I would call them and we would cry it out. And we would kind of talk about how this is hard. And then if something amazing happened, I could call them and say, oh my gosh, I got my dream interview, or I just like nailed that interview. I have done this incredible thing. I finished my personal statement. I hit the submit button. Having those people that you can turn to and rally around, and in return that you can then rally for someone else, is really important. That's probably my number one piece of advice. And it's not like super groundbreaking, but it's so, so, so important. My second piece of advice would be to take care of yourself. Exercise, sleep, eat. Do the things that are going to keep you happy, healthy, and whole. Because you're not going to get through the process unless you are taking care of yourself. That goes for medical school, that goes for residency applications, and that goes for residency as well. So it's really important to try and take care of who you are.
That's very important, because right now, especially when people are applying, they're already so tense about what the future might bring, right? So like mental health needs to be prioritized. We tend to see it everywhere and we tend to like recognize it, but implementing it is and seeing it are two different things. So I'm really happy you brought that up. That like people need to, I guess, take time out for themselves. Just that hour, just go out and exercise, go out for a walk, whatever, like minor little thing, but in the long run, it actually has like a big impact on your mental health and keeping you sane and grounded almost, right?
Mm-hmm. So I'm a huge proponent of I'm a huge proponent of the bubble bath. I think the bubble bath is one of the greatest inventions ever made. Me and my book and a bubble bath and a cup of tea, we have a great time.
I completely agree with you. Anything almost, right? Like
it's about finding your version of that.
Exactly. I think that's what I was trying to say, that like it could be something, as minor as just taking a walk outside, or like just taking time and binge watching on Netflix, right? Like whatever little thing. But it sounds funny to say, but it's true, because it gives you that, that break from constantly like thinking and like being on the go, right? So that's very important. And I think my next question is a little bit more specific for you, simply because you're going into pediatrics. So I wanted to ask you if you have any specific advice for any of our listeners that are interested in going into pediatrics or are planning on applying for pediatrics this year.
So one, I think that networking is important. So being a student member of the American Academy of Pediatrics, attending their conference, it was virtual this year, so you can definitely kind of watch some of the presentations. Networking is really important. I can't really understate how important networking is. Something that a lot of people I've found don't know about is the NRMP's program directors survey. Now, there are over 200 pediatric programs in the United States. And in the survey for 2020-2021, there were 44 responses, but that's 44 more responses than you had before. And what it does, it looks at different parameters that program directors mention when they look at who they're going to interview, and then after they interview them, who they're going to rank and how they're going to rank them. And it looks at a bunch of different parameters. So whether this is for pediatrics or any other specialty, I think it's important to go and look at that data and say, okay, if I'm looking to apply in pediatrics, these are the things that program directors consider important. How can I make this better in my own way? How can I improve my commitment to the specialty? Can I demonstrate that I've done a lot of pediatric volunteering? Can I demonstrate that I have a lot of pediatric experience? That is something that's really important in pediatrics. And then finally, something that I noticed along the interview trail was that in pediatrics specifically, there was a lot of focus on looking at applications holistically. And that does mean something different for every program, because every program is going to value something different. Some programs value people who have a lot of research. Some programs value people who have a lot of clinical experience. Some programs tend to value who is going to be the best fit in our team. So I think it's important to just present who you are authentically, because in pediatrics, in looking at that holistic application, they want to see that you're a real person, that you have a life outside of medicine. And those were kind of the three things that were really important from what I saw in the application trail this year.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing that with us. And now I just have one final question for you. Do you have any advice for any of our listeners, whether they may be pre-med students, med students, international medical graduates? So no matter where they are in this journey, what advice do you have for them?
This is a really good question. So I think for anyone, no matter where you are in this whole process, it's okay to acknowledge that this is a hard thing, and it's okay to do the hard thing. It's also okay to acknowledge that this whole process is really difficult. And sometimes you need support from your friends and family. Sometimes you need to go to bed instead of taking the night out. Sometimes you need to take the night out instead of going to bed. It's important to find that balance, because if you don't find that balance, it's really hard to move through this whole journey. Now, I'm not saying you need to be perfectly balanced at all times, because that's not attainable. There are going to be times when your life is more swung towards studying and being in school, but then it's important that once you can take a little bit of that pressure off, that you can bring yourself back to more of a balance. Then there's going to be times when you're going to put school really far down, and that you're going to put your self-care so much higher. And that's also okay. It's just important to know when you need to bring things more into balance, because we're human. We need a little bit of everything. We need some variety. Our brains love that. So these are all things that are really important. Knowing when to push yourself, when to take your foot off the gas, and importantly, having a really good support system.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you, Dr. Jamieson, for being here as a guest on Project IMG, which is the voice of international medical graduates. And I also wanted to thank our listeners for tuning in and listening to our podcast. This is Shivani Mehta and Dr. Tara Jamieson signing off. Until the next episode, take care and stay safe.